Welcome to Podcast Eateries with your host, Jade Akkermans-Pearce. Today we'll be interviewing Dan Pashman, a two-time John Beard Award winner and two-time Webby Award winner for Best Food Podcast, for his podcast, The Sporkful. He is also the narrator and writer of a documentary that you guys may love, Eat Me or Try Not To, a documentary series from SBS. Today in this episode we'll be discussing episode 6 of Eat Me or Try Not To. Hello Dan Pashman, how are you doing tonight? I'm doing well, how about you? I'm doing great because you're here. I'm a big fan. I love your work, love your cookbook, by the way. I've made multiple things from that for my wife. She loves it. Oh, are you a big pasta fan? Yep, who couldn't be? After trying your recipes, it's hard to revert to normal pasta. Oh, thank you so much. Sadly though, that's not what we're here to talk about. Today we're going to be talking about your amazing documentary, Eat Me or Try Not To. So what inspired you to write this documentary? Were there any events that impacted the creation of it? What inspired me to write this documentary was how traditional farming affects the environment. And during 2020 to 2021, COVID-19 was at an all-time high, and people were panicking and thought it was the end of the world, and the food shortages during that time was so bizarre because people were stock buying and collecting like meats and toilet paper. Yeah, toilet paper was one of the big things you could never find in grocery stores back then. Yeah, you'd arrive there and the entire shelf would be gone. There'd be nothing except for those like one ply ones, like with only the one roll. It's like, I don't want one roll, I want 12 rolls. Yeah. One roll isn't gonna survive me the next 2 weeks. Yeah, and so they didn't have canned foods either. So obviously, since it was just a major food shortage, traditional farming was at an all-time high. They gotta meet the demand. And since traditional farming was required even more than before, of course, more greenhouse gas emissions were being spread. And greenhouse gas emissions take a major toll on the environment, right? Yeah, they do. And I think at this time, when COVID-19 was like, really impacting all of the, amounts of traditional farming that was being needed, I think that's when people really started to realize, like, oh wow, climate change is a real thing. Like, climate change is happening currently because COVID-19, with all the food shortages, it really infected or affected the climate. Is that why you found it important to include protein alternatives that ensured less greenhouse gas emissions, land, and less water usage? Yeah, in the documentary, there's mentions of food alternatives that require substantially less amounts of water, land, and emit much less greenhouse gas emissions. Like, for example, a food alternative that was added in the documentary was phi protein, which is a protein made from fungi. And it, believe it or not, it requires 99% less land, 90% less water, and 1% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are used in traditional farming, which is insane. And it is. I find it astonishing that just by switching to things like phi protein and stuff like that, it can make a major difference in our environment. So if people were to, make that big decision to start switching to more sustainable food alternatives, it would do great for the environment, right? Yes, it would. It really would. And of course, since our population has been increasing even faster each year, to meet that demand, of course, once again, it's going to require more traditional farming. So if we implement alternative ways of farming food, which are way better for the environment, it would be an inspiring starting point in reverting the damage we've done to the climate and the planet's environment. As your documentary discusses future food alternatives, I think it's right to believe that your documentary is aimed at younger audiences. Was that your intention? And if so, is there a reason for this? My documentary is aimed towards a sort of younger demographic, so younger teens, I believe, 13 years of age to 17. I feel like any younger wouldn't really understand what the documentary is really trying to communicate. And I think it's very important that information that's being given out about the future and how we're going to be changing things in the future should really be directed at younger audiences, because they are our future. They're the ones who are going to experience all of this. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Would you say the language that you use in the documentary reflects this? Yeah, as the narrator of the documentary, I made sure to make the language very casual and made sure I sounded, even I am enthusiastic about it, but I made sure that showed in the documentary, because if I'm sort of speaking in a normal tone, I doubt it would be much interesting to younger audiences if the narrator even sounds uninterested. And this is very evident in when I speak about the process of phi protein, since it's such a wordy explanation, and sometimes people can get a little bit overwhelmed with, especially younger audiences can be overwhelmed with too much information being spoken to them and processed. I made sure to put in some comedic sayings in there, kept it entertaining, yeah. And I think it's also important to use inclusive language in it, because I feel like the audience will feel connected to the work. Yeah, it would feel like it's actually relevant to them. Yeah, and inspiring younger audiences to try and consider careers in developing sustainable food for our future is so important. Every day our population grows, and soon we won't have enough food to survive. It's important to educate those who will be a strong factor in our future on like how food will be potentially farmed or made. They're the ones who will be eating phi protein potentially. They're the ones who will be eating synthetic meats and crickets in almost all their meals. Yeah, and you had discussed how crickets are a common food in multiple cultures. Have you considered how vegetarians or vegans feel